Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and joining me today is...
Brendan Norrison, and hot off the heels of what has been the most ridiculous month for our Twitter ever, we thought we would have another new episode for you guys. Hopefully we've got some new listeners out there off the back of Racing Madness, and in terms of an agenda, we're going to kind of recap what actually happened during Racing Madness, and then go back to talking about two very special Dreamcast racers. It's a bit of the new as far as Time Extend goes, and a bit of the oldie, Adam.
Yeah, I think after Racing Madness was incredibly exciting, and I thank everybody for interacting with it and getting excited by it and sharing it. I think we all kind of need to cleanse the palate though after that, because it was a bit of a runaway thing. Like at a certain point, it's just like, damn, like we hoped it would do well, but we never expected it to blow up the way it did. But nevertheless, I mean that's a good problem to have if you consider the problem. And so we're gonna talk about that for a little bit. Then we'll go on to the classic Time Extend discussion, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I guess like just chatting about Racing Madness, I guess if you're listening to this and you don't follow us on Twitter, or you're not on Twitter, which if you're not on Twitter, I think you're living life the right way. That's probably a good thing. What we did was we took 32 of the, what we consider to be, or what are generally considered to be your best racing games of all time, without thinking too much about exactly what that means. We picked 32 really good racing games, and we put them in the bracket, and we seeded them, and every day we would run a poll, and then it took about I think over 2 weeks to get Racing Madness to do all the voting and to get to the end. But the result was pretty crazy, because certain games, as we very quickly discovered, command a huge fan base, a bigger fan base than we even anticipated. While some other games actually didn't perform as well as we thought that they would. And that's, I guess, probably the most kind of globally viewed the general way to put what unfolded, because if you dive into all the matchups, things got pretty surprising at a certain point.
Yeah, for sure. I even think in the kind of top 32 round at the very beginning, there were some major casualties like F-Zero GX, Grid, Forza Horizon 3, Midnight Club 3. It's unbelievable some of the names that went out. And I mean, I think first of all I think in that very first top 32 we started to see a bit of a stifled reaction from some people, amazed that some of these games could go out. And I always think that kind of removes the context of being a top 32 racing game anyway. That is pretty incredible when you think about it. I mean, the purposes of this list wasn't to do an empirical IGN style list where games like Forza Horizon are kind of always destined for the top 10, and we pretty much know what those 10 are going to be. This was actually started to see from the Time Extend community, which in itself, the types of racing games we see get mentioned on Twitter sometimes directly to us is incredible, just to see how niche it goes. It was really to see from our audience who liked what games, and if they had to try and guess what would be the best game ever, vote for the options they felt deserved it the most. And when you think about the matchups, in a top 32, very first round, Grid versus Drive Club, for example, is an absolute juggernaut matchup, and that's just an example of what we had to face. And I think a lot of people maybe got too caught up in the idea that the first round was a bad performance, because it's quite the opposite. This list, we didn't make it based on our favourite games, of course. It was more about what we had seen in our community, what we see people talk about a lot and interact with a lot, and I think that's why some people maybe who didn't follow the account beforehand were a bit surprised at some of the games chosen, or a bit surprised that their favourite maybe didn't win in that first round. I think it's important to realise this genre is so wide and varied. people love so many different kinds of games. There are certain influencers out there supporting certain games. And yeah, it was an absolute perfect match for chaos. And once it started to pick up traction, it was hard to guess what was going to happen, because I don't know if you agree, Adam, but I feel as if we had the same level of interest that we had at the very end, at the very start, I think some of the games that went out in the first stages could have actually made a push towards the final even.
Yeah, because the very beginning was pretty much just a small number of people voting, and then by the final rounds we saw the vote counts go up, 5 or 6 times compared to the beginning. The final rounds also, especially the last one, was a 2-day thing, so that allotted some more time for voting. But yeah, I mean, there were definitely some comments about like certain choices. The biggest one, especially early on, was why is GT3 and GT Sport on the list and not GT4? And I mean, questions like that. There were some questions as to why like Need for Speed Underground wasn't represented with a list of games that is this small. You kind of, because 32 games, again, as you say, like it seems like a lot, but it really isn't. You kind of want to represent different eras and different, kind of flavors of certain franchises. So, the thinking with like GT3 versus GT4 was kind of like, GT3 was like an earlier game, and also it was kind of the one where Gran Turismo really exploded. I mean, Gran Turismo exploded from the very beginning, but like GT3 is the best-selling game in the series. I think the second best-selling game on the platform, second to GTA 3. Like, that was the one that everyone had. And so that was kind of like Gran Turismo's like legendary watershed moment. And then like, if you're a fan, you play GT4 and you probably like GT4 more, and because GT4 had more of everything, but like GT3 is the one where it kind of crystallized that. And so like, that's why I picked GT3. It's one of those things. I mean, Brenda and I can tell you it wasn't like the games that weren't on the list were ones that we hated. Like, we had to lose so many of games that we personally liked. Like, Sega Rally Revo was originally on the list because it's one of your favorite games ever. Sure. And we got rid of it because it just didn't make sense, and we wanted to represent. I think we replaced that with like Driver San Francisco, just because again we wanted to get like diversity in there. We wanted to get different franchises represented and stuff. So that's just kind of the nature of a thing like this. And as I said in the in sort of the post that I made, that was, I don't think it was on Time Extend Twitter, I think it was my personal Twitter, but like this is not a scientific process, Exactly. It's just something people get a kick out of, and so we did it. That was it. It wasn't, it's not something you need to think too hard about. I mean, the final round, which we haven't said on the air, but it was Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005 versus Drive Club. Now, those are both fantastic games. That's why they're on this list. We love them both dearly, but and I think early on I envisioned that Need for Speed Most Wanted, even before like before there was the clear support from it. I think we all knew the Most Wanted had the staying power to go deep. Eventually, very quickly it became clear it was going to go all the way. But like Drive Club, I never would have imagined. I mean, Drive Club was like the 7th seed in its respective region. It went up against Grid and it lost to Grid, which I thought was unthinkable. And then, it beat Grid, and then it beat Daytona USA. Like, you can't predict this stuff. And like, even though we seeded it based on like what matchups we thought made sense, another criticism we got is like, well, why didn't you put like the 2 kart racers against each other? And like, why didn't you put like, I don't know, GT Sport against Forza or something like that? And it's just because like, then you don't have as many varied games making it. Like, if we put, for example, Mario Kart 8 and Crash Team Racing were on in the bracket. If we put them immediately together in the first round, that ensures that only one kart racer can ever move forward in this bracket. And like, that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to have it kind of coming from all sides so that there was a potential for a ridiculous final round. Like, I don't know, Crash Team Racing versus frickin', Colin McRae Rally 2.0. Like something insane like that. So it was it wasn't engineered to do anything in particular other than just be entertaining. And I think it succeeded at that.
I mean, I think, like, if anything, the comments about why aren't the kart racers facing the kart racers, why aren't the sim racers versus the sim racers, it actually kind of encapsulates a point we've made a few times on the podcast. Like, if anything, the absolute need to sub-genreize everything in the racing genre is what stifles it at the end of the day. The need to make Drive Club a simcade by definition, that type of thing, it doesn't help a genre that really needs to try and kind of identify itself differently. I mean, you think about it, if something like Auto Modelista came out nowadays, what would people be determined to call it? Like, it's handling the handling aside in that game, just like people would see that right away and they'd be immediately like, oh, this is simcade because it's harder, or oh, this is an arcade game because it's easy. Like, I feel as if there is that kind of general attitude to racing games nowadays where we try and either discredit a game based on stupid parameters or try and give it more justification because it happens to simulate tyre temperatures at Spa. Like, I feel as if we get lost in these intricacies that ultimately don't matter when a game like Daytona is still shit hot, and that's ultimately what we wanted to prove through the bracket. I think it was more to do with what games in here stand out enough that people are willing to vote for it. And if we're thinking about a standout performer from the bracket, for me, I was amazed at PGR2 how far it got, because it beat Mario Kart 8, right? And a lot of people might say we don't have many fans who like kart racers, but I don't think that's inherently true. Like, I think Mario Kart would have been a stick-on from that before the polls happened. And then to beat Dirt Rally 2.0, which
that was insane.
I mean, that game was flagged by the official Dirt account.
Yep.
And I'm still amazed by it. And when people asked why we didn't have Blur on the list, there's your justification. I feel as if Split Second won a poll against Blur and Mod Nation Racers way back on the Time Extend Twitter account in May, when we were celebrating the anniversary of those games. So that's why Split Second was chosen as well. But even here, if we're thinking about Bizarre Creations and the legacy they've left, PGR2 beating Mario Kart 8 and Dirt Rally 2.0, and then only losing to Most Wanted 2005, that's my performer of the bracket.
And the thing is, it didn't, like, it lost to Most Wanted 2005 because everything did, but it didn't lose by that much. Like, it kept it way closer than Outrun, it kept it way closer than Wipeout HD Fury. It was an impressive showing for PGR2, which I thought would be kind of the most forgotten game, or one of the most forgotten games on this list, because, you know, PGR's memory has been unfortunately sort of replaced in many people's eyes by Forza Horizon, which, you know, we don't necessarily agree with, but that's kind of what has happened. So it was really cool to see PGR2 do that. I think it's funny. I did see the comments like, why isn't Blur on the list? And it's like, honestly, like, I think Blur's a great game, but I don't think Blur, I mean, at least for me personally, it does not crack top 32. Like, there's what I wish more people would understand is, like, there are so many other great racing games than this, and ones you can argue could be in this list, but at the end of the day, they can't all be here. Like, they just can't. I had to get rid of Scud Race, which broke my heart, but like, sorry, not Scud Race, because Scud Race made it.
Lost the GT.
I guess Daytona USA 2 is what I'm thinking of. Yeah, I had to eliminate Daytona USA 2, which to me is like, in terms of being iconic, it's not as iconic as the first game, but in terms of being a better arcade racer, I think it's probably Sega's best, like, technically speaking. And you know, we got rid of it because I think at that point we wanted to give Midnight Club 3 a spot or something like that. It was like another series that hadn't been represented that we wanted to have in there, and that's the challenge you run with a thing like this. So it is what it is at the end of the day, and we've done it, and now that we've done it, we don't worry, we don't have to do it again for a long time, or maybe ever.
Yeah, exactly. And see, the thing is as well, like, if you're looking through this list and are annoyed that your favourite wasn't either in the list or maybe handed a unfair matchup, whatever that means, I just think you got to look at it from perspective, because there is nothing wrong with one of your favourite games of all time being a 7 out of 10. Like, I think I said this in the Discord, I absolutely adore Penny Racers on the PS2. Like, I just fucking love that game so much. But I'd never say that it should be on this list, and Sega Rally Revo was like a last minute pull out, and it was like myself that was kind of talking about it back and forward with you, Adam, when you were putting it together, and I was like, I'd love to have Revo on this list, but if I'm being honest, it probably doesn't do enough to be on this kind of, I was going to say empirical, that kind of goes against the scientific point I made earlier. Not empirical, but kind of a cultured
if you're trying
list.
to represent as many things as possible. I mean, at a certain point, I looked at the list and I was like, there are too many Sega games on this list. And anyone who's listening to this show or has listened for a long time knows that is our favorite developer and publisher. And, you know, we actively at a certain point had to say enough Sega. So that's how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, and if you think about it, right, the best exemplification of why this bracket did its job, the top 16: Gran Turismo 3, Sega Rally 1995, Burnout 3, Ridge Racer 7, Need for Speed Most Wanted, Outrun 2, Dirt Rally, Project Gotham Racing 2, Ridge Racer Type 4, Colin McRae 2.0, GT Sport, Burnout Paradise, Ridge Racer 5, Driver San Francisco, Daytona USA Drive Club. If you had that as a library of racing games, like, you're pretty much ticking every box possible.
Yeah, I mean, those are 16 amazing games. I don't think anyone would complain. I was amazed. I mean, we can go through this list round by round. I know we don't want to do that, but you said Driver San Francisco, and I honestly could not believe the F-Zero GX went out first round. But yeah, you know, that's what happens.
Yeah, and
that's why the decision to put it on there was Driver San Francisco was a good idea. Like there were people who were like, "This is not a racing game."
Oh god, yeah. But like the thing that was one of the small moments. Another one of the small moments about the bracket I loved, where like this Driver San Francisco like fan base emerged from the shadows, like never seen, never heard, and it was like John Tanner avatars and John Tanner usernames. It was just like, it was crazy to see, because it's just a reminder that in this genre there are people like the V-Rally people who are just like, they just love when the games get mentioned and they get so hyped by it, and it's fantastic to see.
And at the end of the day, that's what I want to do. I want to give light and attention to those games, because I could put Gran Turismo's 1 through 4 on here, but is that really gonna be like, do you really want to see that battle? Like, honestly, I don't know, at a certain point it just gets tedious and you need variety. So yeah, I mean, I feel like at this point I'm peeing myself, but this is also like us kind of, you know, at this point a week out from sort of when this ended, reflecting on everything and just being like, expressing all of the thoughts that we really couldn't express when it was going on. So now that that's done, I just say again, regardless, it's the internet, it's Twitter, it is the way it is, and in spite of all of that, thank you everybody for you know, noticing this and voting and sharing it, retweeting it, and sharing your thoughts and stuff. I know that we at this point are kind of like all hot takes out and everything, and I know that these discussions of this game versus that game have gotten old. The bracket is over, so we can move on. But we really appreciated it when it was going on, and it, you know, got way more attention than personally I ever expected. So thank you for that.
Yeah, exactly, and I totally echo those statements. We've also had some fun interactions with some of the more kind of storied racing game influencers and content creators as a result of this. Even some of our own kind of personal heroes within the gaming kind of subsection on YouTube and stuff. It's been a phenomenal ride, and every single person that voted made it worthwhile. And more than ever now, we're seeing people kind of tag us and cool stuff. Like, it's so great when you see people playing like old racing games maybe that were on this list with their CRT out and stuff, and they're like tagging Time Extend. That's the reason we get into this shit at the end of the day. Like, we were all about that passion, like just we wanted to do this initially just to celebrate racing games and the variation within racing games. I feel as if the top 32 exemplified that, but the actual interactions we've had as a result have went even further, because seeing people so enthusiastic about some of these titles that many might consider lost to time now, it's just phenomenal. And yeah, we're building up to that big 50th episode, Adam, and I feel as if right now it's great seeing all the interaction and stuff, because this year, as in general, we'll do a year review at the very end, of course. It's just been fantastic, the amount of people talking to us, showing us cool racing game facts, that type of thing. It's just brilliant. I feel as if Racing Madness was a nice example of that.
Yeah, definitely. And now, if you're listening to first time, thanks for putting us on. And now that we have you right where we want you, we're going to talk about Dreamcast racing games.
Yes, this is the end game. We're in the end game now. We're back to like one of the very first sub-series as we talked about in Sega Racing System. I think this would count as a Sega Racing System episode.
Yeah, it's a Dreamcast racing game. It doesn't necessarily have to be made by Sega, but it's actually a pair of Dreamcast racing games, and we're going to be talking about the Tokyo Xtreme Racer series, although specifically 1 and 2, because that series is actually massive, and I don't think either of us have played most of those games.
Yeah, it's actually it's one of these series is that people who like it really, really like it. Personally speaking, the only one that I've ever been heavily invested in was Zero on the PS2, which I absolutely adored. It's also one of these series, and I guess that will come up as we talk about these two games. It's one of those series where I don't ever find myself like always craving more of it, but when I do revisit these games, I always enjoy myself. It's one of these types of game that probably haven't scaled well in terms of what we expect from modern game design and stuff, but I think that's part of the charm.
Yeah, there are no racing games that really work or feel or operate the way that these do. You basically had the series that started out on the SNES and then had a couple entries in the PlayStation and Saturn generation, and then arrived on the Dreamcast with Tokyo Xtreme Racer 1 being a launch title, and then 2 coming out a year later. And even though the series is very iterative, the development, kind of watching videos and comparing both games, because I have 2, but I never had or played 1, and Brendan, you have 1 and don't have 2, so we can kind of fill in each other's gaps of knowledge. But like when I look at videos comparing 1 to 2, it honestly amazes me that it was just a year in between the development of these games, because they look, not quite a generation apart, but 2 looks so much more visually stimulating to me, even though it's probably the same game under the surface. And then you see 2 going to 0, and you can talk a little bit about 0, especially because you played it. I've played a little bit of 0, but 0 essentially is just like a 2.5 modification on Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2 for the PS2. So like the series just kind of, in a way, it's very iterative, but even then you can sometimes be surprised by the changes. And because I've been playing, at least my experience with 2 is so long. Like I played 2 for the first time when I was a kid, when the Dreamcast, was actually like an active system. I didn't understand how these games worked at all. I didn't, and to be honest, I still don't really get it. I mean, I get it at the surface level, and that's why I feel like if you're a TXR nerd, this is probably going to be the kind of episode where you're going to be able to pick a lot of holes in the things we say, because we're not as immersed in the lore and the series as you probably are. We're definitely not. However, I remember going back to TXR2 after a number of years, and I was probably like a teenager in my early 20s or something like that, and trying, basically pouring through facts that were written like 15 years earlier to try and figure out like how I'm supposed to play this game. And it really is like they don't hold your hand at all. It is classic game design in its purest form. It just happens to be a, Japanese street racing game where you're on highways at night all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's not a type of game you go into and can readily apply any skill sets retrieved from other racing games, because I suppose now would be a good time to just kick off in terms of the game discussion we're going to have. Like you say, that I've been mostly playing the first game in the series because that's the one I was able to track down for a not ridiculous price. And effectively, for those who aren't familiar with the series, like Tokyo Xtreme Racer is effectively a street racing game that takes place at night on Tokyo's highways, like you just said. But from a gameplay perspective, it's not about racing around in a circuit on these highways or winning in the traditional sense. This is a racing game that's basically, as many an article have already said, a fighting game in concept. It's basically 1v1 races on the highway. Each car has a health bar, and by stretching your lead as far as possible, you can basically take away health from the car's health bar. Now, what's interesting in the series as it goes on, as you'll know from 2, Adam, the health bar can also be manipulated by collisions, hitting walls, that type of thing. But in the first game, that isn't actually the case. So in the first game, the only way to take health off each car is to get as far away from it as possible. So, I mean, did you know that at all, Adam, or is that the first that you've heard of?
I actually didn't know that because yeah. I've so I will say I did play 1, but it must have been right after Dreamcast came out. I was really little. I had no idea what I was looking at. We probably rented it from a Blockbuster or something like that. So I didn't know that because 2, honestly, some of the rivals in 2 are just way too fast for you, obviously, but the bigger problem I have is not hitting walls. So to hear that you can slam into walls as hard as you want in the first game and it doesn't really matter, it seems like it would make things pretty easy.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's the kind of the core overarching theme of this conversation of the first game on the Dreamcast. Is that it's very much it feels like a concept of how this game will play out as the series develops past its kind of more primitive roots. The 1v1 racing is great, but the issue is, and you'll know this from playing 2, Adam, the way the cars handle is like very on purpose rigid feeling. Like they're not really they don't really feel like cars in other games. Personally, I don't think like they have a nice sense of weight to them that makes like nailing a high-speed corner on a highway that in any other racing game would be fairly simple to navigate. It makes it feel like an achievement when you're able to kind of line up the corner perfectly. But in the first game, because you're not penalised for hitting walls or hitting cars, that type of thing, you basically just get in the mindset of like slamming into walls and just keep going. It makes the races a bit more anticlimactic than the series would later be. But I think the important thing about the first game, as you would expect, is that it basically sets the scene for where the series ends up, which means that it's still great fun, and once you realise the concept, the 1v1 racing is so great. And the game does this through many ways, in my opinion. Like the health bar system is so simplistic and to the point that once you start a race, you understand what the objective is, which is really important for a racing game that isn't just a finish first type scenario. And then secondly, it also kind of plays into the fact that this is a racing game with a bit more character, you could say, by having like the kind of the player character has a title, and as you race through the game you get a better title, but importantly the rivals that you face and subsequently the boss cars later on in the game also have their own kind of clan, their own title themselves, and it just makes for some great laughs playing this game, because some of the names are like ridiculous. The way the boss cars kind of approach you from behind and flash their lights when they want to race, just that you would do to one of the more lesser rivals. It's just a really fun experience, and one that really does feel very Japanese in the best ways possible. I think Tokyo Xtreme Racer manages to have this character that other racing games don't have, even from the very first game in the series. One of the things as well that really stands out to me, and kind of enhanced my knowledge of cars even as a kid, is the fact that there aren't officially licensed cars in this game technically, but the cars' names are actually the way they would be referred to by the chassis internally by each company. So it's like you see the names type whatever, and the part that is whatever is actually what that car has in terms of its chassis type in real life. And the first time I found out about that, I was blown away, because I was thinking, like, surely they would still have to license this. That I don't get how they get away with it, to be honest.
Yeah, it is the best way in which unlicensed cars can work, right? Because if you are a car nerd and you're playing this game, you'll know exactly what the cars are, because it's not like, first of all, in terms of unlicensed cars, in some games you'll see, like in Horizon Chase Turbo, for example, even the Viper in that game isn't exactly a Dodge Viper. They make slight changes so that they can't be sued, but that wasn't really a problem that anyone was worried about back in the 90s. So, these are full on the same, in terms of styling. They look exactly like real cars. And then you're able to see the chassis code in the name, which, again, if you're a car nerd, you're going to know what that means. You're going to see... It gets really granular, too, because, you'll see, JZA80 or something like that for the Supra, and then you'll see JZA70. I don't know if that's an actual code, but, you'll see slight differences for different models, and then, if you know anything about the Supra, you'll be like, oh, that was the one that was the RZ twin turbo, and that other one's the SZR. You'll know that, and that's really cool. Again, also a really small thing, and if you're just a casual player, unfortunately, that part's going to be lost out to you. But yeah, and it allows them to get kind of all of the cars that need to be in this game without much trouble. Yeah. It's a predominantly Japanese car list, at least for 2, but with 2 you do actually get a couple non-JDM models. There are some Peugeot hatchbacks in there, and there, when you get really late in the game, there is a Dodge Viper, I think, there is a Porsche 911 and a BMW M3, and those cars actually I have never actually been able to drive, because I have never gotten so far in the game that I've even seen them, but they exist, and that's kind of crazy, because with all the JDM cars in this game, if you're playing a good chunk of it, you would never expect to see anything that's in Japanese. So once you do, even once you see a Peugeot, it's like, holy shit, what? Where'd that come from? And it makes me think, wow, were there really midnight runners or whatever in Tokyo in the 90s running Peugeot, I don't know what, not the 206, but the other one before it. Were they really driving those cars? The 306. It's that's kind of funny to think about, next to say Civic Type R's and whatnot. But yeah, it's a really it's a kind of game that if you do have that knowledge going into it, you can really sink your teeth into it, and it really nails the culture well. If that's, if Japanese street racing from the 90s with the, quote unquote aesthetic and everything is what you're after, these games have that in spades in a way that, I feel like many other games maybe tried to pretend or fake it. These games feel really authentic.
Yeah, 100%, and the kind of the variation in the cars really plays into the game's progression as well, because yeah, basically at its core, the more you go into the game, the faster the cars get. But they manage to frame it so like whenever you see a certain kind of car, you almost get that ominous feel like, oh no, that this is going to be a tough one. Like for example, if the AI has a Supra or an NSX, but like you also see like other iconic cars, and if you grew up on TXR, they might resonate with you more than what they're known for in pop culture. Like for example, for me, the Torino AE86, it wasn't Takami's car in Initial D, it was the Rolling Guy's car in TXR. And I think that's the cool way that the game manages to frame its overall, the main mode, the quest mode. It manages to frame it as this like the midnight runners on the highway. And there's actually a blurb that sums it up really well. In the very first game, you get like this kind of cheesy intro before you go into quest mode. And like the first paragraph like says, "In the darkness of the city night, where turbocharged renegades rule the road, the rivals of the dark road, these rulers of the streets await the challenge of an eager novice. Make one mistake and you're last, left behind, swallowed by the dark." And what's funny about that is like it's so over the top and melodramatic, but it sets the scene for what ultimately makes the gameplay exciting. If you make a mistake in this game during the races, you're pretty much beat.
Yeah.
Like if you crash out, the health bar just depletes so fast. And it means that even in the slower cars at the very start of the game, there's always a sense of dread that because the car you've just bought doesn't have like the weight loss tuning or anything like that, like if you even slightly miscorrect your steering and the car's body weight shifts in a way that's like irrecoverable and smacks like a passing by truck or hits one of the road markers in the tunnel, and your race is ruined. It creates like a nice, exciting atmosphere to the races regardless. Obviously at the very start of the game it's incredibly easy in pretty much all of them, but especially the original, with the being able to wall ride and stuff. But like as soon as you start to kind of get actually challenged and you run into some areas of traffic and that type of thing, especially when you're looking on the mini-map and you can see there's a junction coming up, that's always a bit of excitement because the corners are a bit harsher, there's a bit more traffic in those areas. The game does a good job of making what is essentially a glorified drag race with the occasional turn very exciting and different to play. And I think that's one of the reasons why even the original on the Dreamcast is one of my favourite games on the console, because there really is nothing like this, and in my opinion it's achieved by making the cars handle so uniquely. I don't think this type of game would work if the handling was as tight and controllable as most other arcade racers. The reason it works for me is the more that you climb up the speedometer, it is a bit boaty physics wise, you could say, once you start to get higher speeds, but it just like every time you turn the steering wheel even a little bit, it seems like you're taking a risk at a certain point when you're in those faster cars.
Yeah, it adds to the drama. And yeah, you described it perfectly when you said, you know, even though a lot of these roads, it feels like a drag race with a turn or two in them. I am afraid of turns in this game in a way that I don't fear corners in most racing games. Tokyo Xtreme Racer really makes you dread a turn that you see coming up, because there's especially one part of the highway loop that I think is in both games, and it's just a very, very, very long straight line. And anytime I am battling a rival and we're coming up on that, I'm so excited because I'm like, I'm going to be fine. Like if I have the horsepower advantage, like if I can just get around them, I can really do some damage here, because at the end of that very long straight line is a very tight corner and the bridge, and I'm definitely going to lose it there. So yeah, I mean, it all works very well. You know, you feel like the game, the handling model is strange but weighty, and I appreciate that about it. It's a little understeery, but I do like how dramatic it can get, and it works well for the kind of game and the sort of roads that you're on. we never talked about actually who's responsible for his game, but if you're a fan, it's a Genki developed series, and like they always, I think Tokyo Xtreme Racer is obviously what they're most well known for, but like all of their racing games are very unique in that way. They're never really comparable to anything else. I mean, you can look at MRC on the N64, you can look at like Racing Battle C1 Grand Prix on the PS2, one of their last PS2 games, I think. No one really ever does it like them, and this is probably the most exemplary of that. And it's something you also see reflected in sort of the system of progression in this game. So, like as you were saying, Brend, you have these battles, but there is sort of this invisible tree of enemies that you don't even really know exist. I mean, you go up against someone and they have a name, but everyone's part of a club. And once you defeat enough drivers in that club, you might face a mid-boss. If you beat the mid-boss, you might face a few more enemies or something like that, and then you might get to an actual boss. The thing is, the game doesn't tell you any of this, so you pretty much just have to, like, sort of feel it out. Be like, oh, I've beaten 2 people from this club, so I guess, if I see someone else that I haven't beaten, which would be marked on your map, then you know that that's, like, a big opportunity. But you also have to remember which clubs they're from, and then, like, there's the added challenge of, like, if you, for example, face a mid-boss and you lose, that actually sets you back in a way, because, like, you either may not be able to face that mid-boss again, or if you beat the mid-boss, you might have been able to go straight to the actual boss, but because you lost to the mid-boss, now you have to face other enemies before you get further. So it's just, like, it is a mess, and they don't tell you any of it, and that's probably the biggest issue I have with this game. And it's not so much that, like, I guess objectively you could say it's bad game design, because unless the player really wants to get into the lore and explore this stuff, they won't know. But it's not even that. It's just that it's very obtuse. And honestly, I don't know how I would have been able to figure it out without FAQs or anything like that, because there is a lot here. And I guess it speaks to the power of the series and the love that people have for a series, that, like, there are people who will respond to us on Twitter who will make references to certain enemies in the game, and I'm just like, how do you remember that guy out of the 370 drivers that are in Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2? Like, I don't know how people have this, like, incredible, like, database, like, memory for all of the individual characters in this game, because it floors me. But again, I think it's just a testament to how powerful it was.
I think as well, like, in the very first game, you have these other drivers, the other clubs, but there isn't too much distinctive beyond the kind of logo, the name, and the car. But as the series progresses, it starts to incorporate driving characteristics into the actual drivers as well. So, like, if you look at the bio for some of them, it will say, like, known for his reluctance to take corners at high speeds. So they can be, like, comically fast, like cars in straight lines, and then they get to the corners and just basically come to a standstill, and then in, like, Angelus and Ridge Racer fashion, just, like, fucking floor it on the straightaways and catch up with you again. And there can be loads of, like, silly stuff like that. Even, like, this type of game, I always, in my opinion, it's, like, perfect when you're kind of a child playing racing games, because you don't care enough about an actual story, but little bits of lore here and there are what make games memorable. And even just silly things like the edgy guy that has the fully blacked out car with the red rims and stuff, like, you're just like, oh, it's so cool. And he only appears at certain times a day. The obligatory character with 3 question marks as their name. There's loads of little elements like that would become a bit more prominent in the later games, and I think that's where Genki deserve plaudits, because in the first game, the gameplay loop is great, minus the lack of collision and environmental damage, which takes away a lot of the drama, and the introduction of clans and characters and player titles is great, but it kind of lacks that little bit of polish that they then add in the subsequent games, giving them these characteristics. And like you said, it is a bit frustrating if you don't have a walkthrough and stuff to find some of these guys. But there's other elements as well that I really appreciate, where like Rolling Guy are one of the first like clans that you face throughout the series, and then I think it's in Zero. One of the members of that clan is actually one of the like final bosses, but he's still using the fucking the Traino. It's just been like modified to shit, and it's just funny because you've been versing these guys with like fucking 3 ace cards as their clan logo, a skeleton, all of this stuff, the famous angel with the scythe, and then it's just like the big smiling Rolling Guy icon appears, and it's like, is he in the right place? it's just funny because like it's a typical like trope in manga and stuff where there's always that unlikely foe who's in the high ranks, and Tokyo Xtreme Racer plays that up really nicely, and it just gives the game a bit more character aside from you are facing faster cars. There are examples here where one of the like ridiculous hidden bosses drives like a Nissan Cube or something, and it's just like little moments like that make you go, yeah, that's pretty cool. And in the first game, those moments are kind of few and far between, sadly. It very much feels like a basis from which they would build upon as the series got a bit further on. But even still, like, I just really love this game, and it's just a shame that something literally as small as not having damage for collisions ruins a lot of the drama and excitement that the series should have, because, like we've talked about, the scariest thing in Tokyo Xtreme Racer is taking any given corner, and you kind of remove that when, so long as you kind of have the right trajectory, you can kind of hit the wall and continue on.
Yeah, and I guess with that, like Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2, what I've noticed, I mean, I didn't even realize the lack of damage when you hit walls in the first game, but in addition to that, there does seem to be more fleshing out of the rivals and stuff like that. There is a section sort of the menu where you can read about the rivals and kind of learn what their characteristics are. You also kind of notice this like graphical shift in the game, and it's interesting what they've done, because if you look at videos and you compare the two, I don't know if the first one attempts to run at more than 30 frames per second. I mean, I guess you could verify that.
Yeah.
But the second one sort of has an uncapped frame rate, so sometimes it's very, very smooth, and sometimes it literally slows to a crawl. I mean, just like if you're racing someone and you come to like 2 or 3, sort of vehicles on the road, like, just cars, traffic on the road, that can be enough to just totally just slam the game down to a couple frames per second. And then it'll pick right back up again. So it does definitely seem to be performance limited. However, the trade-off to that is that, I mean, I remember playing this game when I was a kid, and I legitimately thought it was the most beautiful video game I'd ever seen, because I can't verify this for certain, but in my opinion, Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2 had the most beautiful and detailed car models for like the day it came out, because like, holy shit, I mean, they still look fantastic, but like, you have the reflections going over the cars, you could bring the camera in really close so they're really big on the screen, and when you look around, especially in 2, like in 1 they had kind of a skybox, in 2 they lose the skybox and the sky is just black. And so all this game really has to render are buildings, the road, and some walls occasionally, or maybe a tunnel. And then it seems to spend like 50 to 70% of its polygon budget on your car, which I think is a really car nerd kind of way of, engineering your racing game. But I love it. I mean, I loved it at the time. I fell in love with the way the game looked. Visually, it's striking in that way, but also just the UI is beautiful in both games. It looks fantastic. Yeah. The music is incredible. Like, I don't know the first game soundtrack that well, but TXR2's soundtrack is without a doubt in my top 5 like racing game or just video game soundtracks. It really is that amazing. Every single song is a banger. And again, this being a Genki racing game, like it feels like nothing else out there, and that extends to the soundtrack. I mean, no game, has has a soundtrack, I think, that quite sounds like this one. And it just contributes, it's kind of that Ridge Racer Type 4 thing in a way. It just contributes to the overall vibe, and it really makes it memorable. I mean, I feel like I like electronic music that I like today because Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2 was like so formative for me.
Yeah, for sure. The soundtrack is pretty much consistent throughout the series, and 1 is no exception. I think as well, one of the things that really kind of tie together the package are the very small cutscenes that will play if you're versing a particularly storied racer as well, because it just helps build up that kind of hype before the race, especially when you're just not sure how fast some of these cars are going to be. Some of them are utterly mind-blowingly quick, and you have to kind of think of a bit of a different strategy to beat them. And ultimately, I think what makes Tokyo Xtreme Racer so memorable is that it isn't just a typical racing game. Like, street racing became incredibly popularised by Need for Speed Underground, but I feel like kind of highway racing, I don't even know many other series that have tried to kind of take this mantle from Genki and Tokyo Xtreme Racer, and I don't think you could come up with a better gameplay mechanic than pretty much making it a fighting game, because it highlights what the challenge is on these types of race. It isn't so much about hitting the right corners and stuff, it's more about getting as far away from your opponent as possible when you've literally got a few corners to do it. It almost makes me wish in like GT Sport you could go into a TXR type mode for the Tokyo highways on that game.
Yeah, absolutely. It really changes the dynamic of the way you play the game. It unfortunately exposes some flaws too, because one of my favorite, I don't know if you can call it a bug, but one of my favorite like weird things about just Tokyo Xtreme Racer is that the AI will have a really difficult time trying to figure out which road to take in a junction, especially especially if you're in front of it. Like, that's the funny thing, is like sometimes you'll be trailing the AI, it'll be like, is it gonna go left, is it gonna go right, and that like jukes you out, and then it ends in a draw, and it's like, alright, I was behind, I mean, I probably wasn't going to pass him, it's fine, I'll take the draw rather than the loss. But if you're in front and the dude behind you doesn't go the same direction as you, especially if they have all the time in the world, because that will happen, it'll be like, you'll have a massive lead, or a lead that's not so massive. Like, the AI obviously knows where you are, but like it could see where you're going, and yet it will still choose the other road, or it will choose a road that is locked to you, which is especially a problem in 2 because I mean, I don't know how 1 works, but in 2 basically half the map is locked for most of the game. So when it goes the wrong way, you're just like, what the fuck, come on. And then you can't re-challenge them because they're on a different road. So it's just, that is probably one of my favorite awful things about this game, because at a certain point you really feel like it should have been addressed, but it just like never was, and so you can just get into these ridiculous situations. Sometimes they'll just slam into the middle of a junction because they can't make up their mind. It's really funny.
Yeah, and especially like in the later games as well, because of that damage on collisions. Sometimes you'll be in first and you'll just see like a massive chunk of their health bar deplete, and you know exactly why it's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I always got so happy anytime I saw like the driver in front of me like crash into one of those yellow trucks or hit, just like a car just on the highway. It was always a great moment for me. I mean, I will say, in terms of AI, the game does kind of feel unfair, because there are some cars that are just going to be way faster than you, and you know it going in. Like you said, when you see the Supra, when you see a really souped-up RX-7, in my playthrough, I still have like a Lancer Evo 5, and like if I see those other cars, I know it's over for me. But they can also take corners way faster than you, which kind of feels unfair. Like, I notice that a lot. Like, I feel like all the AI cars have way more grip than you in this game. And I think in classic racing games, that was not as much of an issue. It was pretty much always assumed and obvious when the AI was cheating. But I think today, like, the idea of the AI having not authentic or genuine advantage over you in a way like that is a little bit more frustrating than it might have been back in the day. I mean, when you're a kid, you would have just been like, oh, he's really good. But like now you can kind of like see through the bullshit and you're just like, damn, well, I will never be able to carry an extra 30 miles per hour through that corner. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why if you've never played these games before and you're maybe interested after hearing us talk about it, try and go in with the mindset that you're playing a game that happens to be based around racing as opposed to a kind of traditional racing game, because like you said, there's a lot of gimmicks at play here that make for a fantastic fun experience, but it's not something like you can play and rely on your racing ability a lot of the time. It is kind of a skill in the game to kind of guide the AI cars into other trucks and stuff, and the aforementioned junction madness can be incredibly frustrating, especially if you're versing one of the later bosses. It's a very fun, very Genki game, and I think that's an important point because I think on the back of TXR people think like Genki are these like forgotten heroes of the racing game development scene, but through other projects they've tried to do outside of TXR, they've had kind of middling results, like Daytona USA 2001. I think like they know the exact handling that makes TXR work, and I think that's evident from the first game onwards. But I don't think like you could ever say I'd like these guys to make a traditional racing game, and it's good because TXR isn't that.
Yeah, I mean, all they ever really make is weird stuff, and this game is very weird, so it definitely fits that bill. And there was something else I actually wanted to say about these games that is totally slipping my mind right now, and I hope I can remember it. But yeah, Zero was always a weird one to me. I might actually have that game somewhere. I need to look. I remember I really wanted it when I was a kid and I got a PS2 because I had enjoyed TXR2 so much. And I don't think I ever had it when I was young, but when I was a teenager, my friend had it, and so I basically stole his copy. That might be the one I have somewhere. And I put it in, and I was kind of disappointed to find that it was basically just TXR2 again, with seemingly really no changes aside the UI looks a lot worse in my opinion. And the music that I loved from TXR2 in a lot of cases has been remixed to be worse. It's one of those situations where it's like every decision you made here is not really flying for me. But the one thing actually, okay, so this is what I wanted to say earlier, is something I really loved about TXR2 is it has that sort of Automodelista quality to the car modifications and the upgrading. And what I mean by that is just like all of the parts that are on offer, I don't really know if they're real or not. They're definitely not licensed. But there's some, I mean, you know, you'll have maybe like a selection of like 5 different bumpers or you know, 5 different side skirts or hoods or whatever for your car. They all look amazing. Like that's often the issue I run into with Forza is I feel like all of their aftermarket parts look like crap. And all of the aftermarket parts in this game or in these games just look really, really good. Like it was really one of the first games I ever played where I was excited to modify my car, and I just thought that was like the coolest thing ever. Like you can make some amazing looking cars in this game. You know, it's not very, there's no livery yet or anything like that. I think you can put a sticker on your car, but that's about it. It's not that deep, but it is very simplistic. But like I just remember like there are certain body kits that stick out to me, like what you can put on like the S2000, which was like one of this game's like kind of cover cars because it was like, you know, new at the time, and I just remember some of them looking absolutely insane. So I think that's another way in which this game really nails the cultural aspect of it, and one of the sort of things that I really miss about Tokyo Xtreme Racer. I wish we had a game today that really tried to approach that sort of that vibe and that aesthetic and that time and that culture. Like, it's really been missing, and you know, I don't think Genki is. I think they tried doing like a mobile racer recently, and it didn't really pan out, and I think it ended. I don't think they're in position to do that, but I hope somebody is. I know there's that Night Runners project.
Yeah.
That might be that sort of thing, but I don't know enough about it to say.
I mean, the funny thing is, like, despite it looking graphically great, and especially 2 on Dreamcast, because it's such a massive jump, it's because, like, they can implement it. Like, they can implement all the necessary visuals in such a simplistic to the point way. There's no need to get lost in the overall environment which it takes place, because it's on the Tokyo highways. There's no, like, ridiculous kind of environmental effects to consider or anything like that. All you really need are the highway loops and the cars, and you can make a game that looks fantastic so long as the simple visuals that are on display are nailed properly. And that's what I really love about this game. It felt so mythical playing through it, because just something as simple as the boss car approaching you from, like, behind once you'd finished another race, the way that it used the flashy visuals to its advantage was really cool. You were saying about, like, the fact that you can customise the cars being important in this game and how it represented the culture, and it's so true. Like, every single rival in this game has a very distinct car that, while you're playing through it anyway, you'll instantly recognise and be like, right, that's the mid-boss I lost to last time and he's back for more. But instantly you're put in the mindset of, I want to beat this guy. And it's something that I don't think racing games do enough outside of liveries. Like, take something like Forza Horizon, for example, where the AI cars are just so, like, lacking personality or anything that makes them distinguished. Compared to, like, Tokyo Xtreme Racer, where it's like every single AI you race in this game is its own character within this universe, and it isn't told through an overdramatic backstory or anything like that. It's something as literally as simple as, this is his symbol, this is his car, and this is his driving style. That's the 3 core elements of every single AI in Tokyo Xtreme Racer. And when you combine that with the very mysterious nighttime driving and the kind of emphasis on just flashing your headlights to start an event, like, everything is just so well defined within that game, and the culture of highway street racing, it just makes it a fantastic experience to be part of. And it just goes to show, like, you can cram your game with as much of everything as you want, but if you don't nail the core fundamentals, in the case of TXR, the car customization, the quest mode, then ultimately it will always pale to games like this when it comes to being engaging. And I think that's where TXR on the Dreamcast really shines, because everything just feels so well polished and thought out that it just makes it a fun experience to play and be part of.
It really is a paramount example of doing amazing work with just sort of a limited, set of assets and just game design. Like, it's very straightforward, as you've said. And yeah, I mean, essentially you're racing in a tube. It is the most beautiful, like, fucking tube you've ever seen, and the car model is, like, ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, essentially you're driving in a tube and in this corridor, and it is able to sort of transcend the sum of its parts and feel really, really special. And yeah, you got to imagine that it's been, 2 generations since we really had one of these. Actually, well, there was Import Tuner Challenge on the Xbox 360, which I never played, which was Shitoku Battle X. But I don't know. I just my mind goes like to the end, like trying to think of like all the crazy ways in which they could utilize the power of systems now that, they really had to in the past design the game around limitations, and the results were generally good. But now, what would a modern Tokyo Xtreme Racer game look like? That's a really exciting thing to think about, and I hope somebody makes that, or whatever is being done right now comes through on that promise, because it was a mainstay. Like, I think we really took it for granted. I know I did at a certain point. Like, I don't a bunch of them came out on the PS2. There was 0, there was 3, there were the drift games. I never played any of them. And when Import Tuner Challenge came out on the 360, I think that was actually kind of a victim of marketing. I think at the time when I was a kid, if I had known that that was a Tokyo Xtreme Racer game, I would have probably tried it. But because it just had like the really shitty ass looking like hot import Knights kind of aesthetic to the front of it, I was just like hard pass. I don't care.
It was the same with Street Supremacy on the PSP as well, published by Konami. Like when I bought that game, I didn't know it was Tokyo Xtreme Racer. I remember like watching like a fucking 240p preview video on GameSpot back in the day, and I was like, oh, that reminds me of Tokyo Xtreme Racer, I'm going to play that. Bought it, turned it on, and then when I seen Rolling Gaia, I was like, wait, what? This is a TXR game? And yeah, that's pretty much a port of the very first game, or it feels that way anyway, if I remember content-wise.
Yeah, that's what people have said. It's funny that's another game that like I remember when it came out, and I probably should have tried it, and I didn't. And the PSP is such a has been said to be like kind of such a console or a system of parity with like the original Dreamcast, because you also had the Crazy Taxi ports, you had the Power Stone ports. At a certain point, the PSP almost became like the Dreamcast, like but in portable form. And so it's really appropriate that those games landed there. But Wikipedia actually points this out, and I need to find the line. So I mean that is a port of the first game, but the Tokyo Xtreme Racer series. Yeah, okay. So it's actually the Wikipedia entry is pretty dense. Whoever did the Shitoku Battle Wikipedia page deserves some credit. Because under the franchise section, it says the series is known under many names through localizations, such as Tokyo Highway Battle when published by Jalico and THQ, Tokyo Xtreme Racer when published by Crave, Tokyo Highway Challenge and Import Tuner Challenge by Ubisoft, and Street Supremacy when released by Konami. So this series has been published by like so many different publishers. It has had so many different names on it, which is it's kind of sad that Genki had to go to these ends to just get their game out there, but also speaks to the staying power of the series at the time, because they were able to pump them out, and they were always ultimately able to find a publisher to do it. And apparently, I didn't know this because, like I said, I barely played the game, but the theatrical trailer of the first Fast and Furious movie and the 10-minute Tokyo hardcore documentary, I don't know what that means, were in Western editions of Shitoku Battle Zero.
What? I can't even remember that.
I don't know. Maybe it was American versions and not PAL versions, but yeah.
Wow, that's so
you can watch a trailer for Fast and the Furious in Tokyo Xtreme Racer Zero, and I remember the first game was sponsored by Import Tuner, right? I think Import Tuner.
Yeah, it was
magazine.
Indeed. It's pretty heavily featured.
Yeah. And what's the name in Europe? It was Tokyo Highway Challenge, right?
Yeah, they changed it. It was Tokyo Xtreme Racer. Well, sorry. So it was Highway Challenge, and then by Zero, I think they changed it back to Tokyo Xtreme Racer.
It's one of those cases where like Extreme is like stupid because, you know, at that time everything had like Extreme in it and had the X, but I think I attributed it so much with that series that to me, even though like Shitoku Battle is the name of it, I still think of it as Tokyo Xtreme Racer. Like I have to. Yeah. It's just such a part of the name. It's almost like a Scud Race Super GT thing for me. Like I think I call it Scud Race now because the world calls it that. But before the internet, or even once I knew about the game, like I would never call it anything other than Super GT. It was always Sega Super GT.
See, I'm just going back to one of your previous points about like what a Tokyo Xtreme Racer could look like nowadays. Can you imagine like that hyper to the point aesthetic with like ray tracing and stuff?
God.
Oh my days.
Yeah. I mean that's the beautiful thing about like not having to render like a ground. You know, or like pedestrians. Like it really frees you up to do some amazing things. But I think that's one of the benefits of the series is that doesn't maybe take that much complicated game design or asset design to produce something that looks really good. And I think that's where Genki was able to succeed with these games, because I don't know, when you then go take that and compare it to Daytona USA 2001, which is a mess for a lot of reasons, everything kind of falls apart. But in this very controlled environment that is Tokyo Xtreme Racer games, it works very well.
I just wonder what Genki are up to now, because apparently as of 2019 they had 151 employees, so it's not even as if they're working off of a skeleton squad or anything like that. So yeah, I'm just having a look now. So business contents, planning, development and sale of video games, planning and development of pachinko and patchy slot. So I'm guessing that's where they mostly concern their efforts now, sadly.
I think they did what every, prodigious but not super successful Japanese developer from the 90s did, which is they went into publishing mobile games and pachinko. I feel like that's just where they all ended up. I mean, Imagineer, who worked on MRC, I think, with them, and then also worked on GT64, which is a decent N64 racer, they just make mobile games. I think they don't even make mobile games. They make like sticker packs that you can buy for like iMessage and Line.
It's so sad. I found up to date employee figures actually. As of March 31st, 2020, they've got 152 now. So they've employed one other person. Maybe that's the TXR guy.
They've grown. Also, interesting thing about the Genki logo, if you didn't know it, the Genki logo is a picture of a face, a childish drawing of a face, and that was a drawing by the creator's son.
Ah, that's cool.
So
I had a Genki sticker on my very first car, an old 1990 Suzuki Swift.
That's so cool. That's so cool because I have that sticker on my car in TXR2. So it's like driving a TXR2 car in real life. It's amazing.
That's it. And I've never been able to find the storefront I got that weatherproof sticker from again. I always remember like I got that and it was like 2 Drive Club stickers, but the Drive Club stickers were like backgroundless, so it was like the main parts of the emblem, but then like, the red of the car behind it. It was really cool. The person that was producing those disappeared off the face of the earth though, and I'm sad because I mean maybe Redbubble and stuff now like that you could find something, but this guy, if I recall, was actually creating these pretty bespoke, so it's really fucking cool to have a Genki sticker on my first car.
If you know anyone who creates Genki stickers, please get in contact with us and we'd like to buy some. Or if you in fact yourself produce Genki stickers and you're listening to this.
I just want to see what an album art inspired by the Genki logo would look like from yourself, Adam, because you always do such a good job. I want to know what you would.
And the TXR covers look so cool, especially the Western covers or whatever, but the Japanese covers are beautiful. Especially the Shitoku Battle 2 cover that has it's just their logo with the Japanese characters and the sort of like plus sign and then 2. And then that's it. Those are all the words you get on the cover, and then you just have like a side profile of a Honda NSX just bathed in midnight street lamp. That's it, and it's just so simple and beautiful.
I think like the problem with the Western covers is that they tried to make it look evidently based on that Fast and Furious trivia, like look kind of similar to the kind of street racing theme that was relevant at the time, but although in some of them like Tokyo Xtreme Racer Drift, it's just very crude 3D graphics.
They're really bad. I mean, I think the Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2 cover, even the Western one, is pretty good because it's just an NSX and a Supra just kind of going through a corner, and the NSX is like drifting, and it's all like assets from the game, but at a higher resolution, everything, so they look really crisp and beautiful. It's almost like a CGI render, and yeah, it's a good look. And the cover of it has a quote from GameFan that says, "The undisputed king of Dreamcast racers." I would say I would dispute the undisputed part of that, but I would definitely say it is one of the kings of Dreamcast racers. This is certainly one of my favorite Dreamcast racing games, and one of my favorite racing games ever. It did cross my mind that we didn't have any Shitoku battle titles on the Racing Madness bracket, but again, as we said, it's there was stiff competition there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, like, I absolutely adore these games, but I also think they kind of epitomise the whole 7 out of 10 racing game type thing, where I think they're like, I love them to bits, but I think, like, in terms of the kind of extra touches that make something a racing game incredibly special, it's probably like, if you aren't totally enamoured with the gameplay mechanic, I can see why you could be disappointed by this game. And I think that's the biggest issue. If you don't quite get on with the way that it handles the racing, I could imagine this not being something to play. But personally, like, I love it to bits.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about it, because I was really racking my brain for, like, we really have talked about, like, most series. Like, we're kind of, I'm not gonna say we've talked about everything. There's certainly some we haven't, but, like, in terms of, like, our core interests, I feel like we've touched on almost everything, and I feel like we're not running out of ideas, but I have to dig further into the well. Like, Need for Speed was, like, such an obvious one that we hadn't talked about until we had those episodes, and we did the one with Casey, which was fantastic, and now we can cross that off our list. We can cross off Tokyo Xtreme Racer off the list, which is good. Maybe return to it and talk about Zero or something at a different time, but yeah, I'm just glad we got to talk about a Dreamcast racing game, because it's been a long time since we've done that, and these are kind of my favorite subjects for Time Extend, because nobody's talking about Dreamcast racing games anymore.
Exactly, everyone talks about everything but the racing games. Like, I always find it incredible when people are talking about why the Dreamcast was so good. Did they actually forget just how many bangers it had in the genre? It's one of my favourite topics as well, and I think it's because it's really like almost returning home after a long trip away. Whenever we get to do a Time Extend episode on the Dreamcast racers, it feels like we're still within that first 1 to 10 episode window. Yeah,
don't go back to those episodes, because they have a lengthy news section that is ill-advised.
I almost feel like we can remaster the first.
Just we don't have to remaster them. We should just I should put a notice on every single episode from 1 to 10. Just, like, skip a half hour into this. Just skip the first half hour.
Unless you want to see us pretend to care about the 5 latest cars added to Forza.
Added to Forza 7. Oh my god, the Totino's car pack. Yeah.
Oh man. We found our niche through that and realised what we wanted to talk about, and ultimately that's all that matters.
Right, no regrets. It got us here, so you can't regret it.
Exactly.
Alright, well, thank you everybody for listening to this episode, and you'll hear from us again soon.
Thanks for listening, guys.